Yeah, I hope you're all doing well. Uh, we're going to go ahead and get started. Jump right into the text here. I think you can uh, see it now, and I'm using OneNote. I do like this software quite a bit. Um, it's really nice for markup and recording, and I've got these directories of these different classes, class notes, different things that I'm working on. So I'm developing a constituent marking course. Here's my constituent marking of First Corinthians 12 to 13. But I'm also doing developing a grammar points set of episodes, working with purpose clauses. And anyway, I've given paper presentations off of this software and do class work out of it. Very handy. So if you haven't uh, learned about it yet, I would encourage you to look at it. And so here's our Greek reading group. A couple things before we get started. Just wanted to alert you to some things. Maybe I'll I'll copy some things in the chat. First off, I'm copying a link here to a Spotify playlist that I've developed. I can't remember what this one does. It might be the constituent marking that I've done, but I've made other playlists, Spotify playlists of our proof text podcasts, of which these reading groups go into. So eventually I'll gather all this Ephesians Greek reading groups. I might sell it as just a little bundle on our website, but you could access it through YouTube. But yeah, we're nearing the end of Ephesians. Um, so so yeah, it's amazing the kind of content, kind of fun actually, just all the content I've generated, and just sharing insights and reading the text and these kinds of things. I made a playlist with Michael Halcomb's and I are here I am getting into it, our Galatians text. And so here is, I might as well go ahead and copy this over as well. This is over 46 or 47 hours of us reading the Greek text of Galatians, translating it, and talking about it. And we're nearing the end. In fact, we just recorded um, our last episodes. Yeah, so what a journey that's been. So anyway, there are some other resources here. Just want to let you know about that. Also, something fun coming up is that we've started an initiative called Glossa House University. And here is a listing of 2 courses that are being offered. We're in conversations with several others on courses, one on textual criticism. Very excited about that. And particularly the course that I'm going to be offering is exegesis. And so if you haven't seen that, here's a link to it. And you get my In Step with God's Word book right here. And we're going to walk through the text. Yeah. So anyway, there's a few people signed up, a couple people, and I think more will be signing up. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll start in March, and that'll be 1 hour a week, and we'll look at how to interpret the New Testament. All right. So just wanted to let you know about those things coming available and that are available as well. So we're going to pick up in Ephesians 6:1 through 9. And last time, just to give us some context, um, we talked about the this move uh, to address everybody, you, each one. So this however marks a little bit of a disjunction. It's often translated as nevertheless. Also you, and then this is appositional to you, and the kat ina is a distributive construction. So it's particularizing the you. And then you're going to get two further particularizations. The first one is each one, thus let him love his own wife as himself. So that's the first particularization, dealing with the husbands. By implication, since he's talking about his own wife, to love, let him thus love as he loves himself. Moreover, so the de here with the gune is a moreover. This is adding a distinctive development. The wife, and then you don't have a verb. And so the issue is what kind of verb are we to imply there? And I argued last time that we should just simply resupply let love, because this is from the context. This is the previous verb, which is reapplied there. And I think it's understood here. This idea of love is the most easy kind of thing. Now, people might object and say, well, now, wait a minute. Paul was saying that, husbands are the one particularly to love. And yet throughout Ephesians, it's clear that love has been a part of the message. So here's a response that I gave to somebody who was dialoguing with me about this. And you can maybe pause the video and kind of read my response. I mean, it's clear that by this point in the discourse, the whole community is responsible for loving one another. And there's something kind of similar going on here, because submission is also something to be done to one another. So in 521, we're submitting to one another in reverence of Christ. Isn't that interesting? So here's the word reverence again, and the verb submit is reapplied to the wife in 522. And so I think the word love is simply reapplied here. So it's interesting. I believe that there's a parallel in the constructions of implying the word. So I think it makes sense that the wife loves her husband. And this becomes the means by which she's able to properly respect or fear him, depending on how we understand what that word phobeo means. I mean, respect is how it's translated, but fear, which is kind of interesting because, why would love be necessary to properly respect and fear? I think it makes really good sense, because love, in my understanding, is to value the other as God values them. And there's a sense in which that love is subordinated to God's love and priorities. And within the marriage relationship, as we saw throughout this passage, the husband-wife relationship is subordinated to the Christ church relationship. In fact, that's the more fundamental reality under which the husband-wife relationship exists. And this husband-wife relationship is described out of the life of being filled with the Spirit and mutual submission. So that's all the framework that Paul has been laying out here. And so for me, the understanding of a wife loving her husband is to love in a way that God loves, but also understanding that there are boundaries, and that there's a greater reality. There's a relativization of that relationship to her husband. There's a relativization of that relationship to Christ and the church. In other words, the wife's primary relationship is to Christ and the church, and underneath that, and what should be governing the husband-wife relationship is in fact the Christ and relationship to the church. And so I think there's a lot to reflect on there. And I would argue, and I might be the first one to have argued this, I don't know, that the verb to be understood here is really just what is easily supplied from the context, and that is love. And I think this is indeed the appropriate means to appropriately respect the husband, because we're not talking about outright subjection here, outright fear of the husband. No, no, that is relativized to fearing Christ and understanding the priority of the Christ church body relationship, of which the wife is a member, and presumably, hopefully, her husband as well. Now, in terms of that, so I think there's some ideal circumstance that this text is speaking to. So we need to understand that it's presuming a certain kind of ideal setup. We'd have to go to other passages to kind of think through difficulties that might arise where there is not the ideal setup taking place. And one of those passages would be 1 Corinthians 7, which, by the way, has a real similar mutual giving of wife to husband, husband to wife, what we see in Ephesians. It's really clear that there's mutuality in terms of I think giving of themselves, I think sexually, physically, and let's not limit it to that. And in many ways, every way. So the husband-wife relationship is a mutual relationship based on mutuality of love and respect. But then there are scenarios that are addressed there where a spouse wants to leave. And I would say there, Paul says, let him go. Let him go in peace. So, in our kind of culture today, and I'm speaking from experience because I've been divorced, I needed to set up boundaries earlier, and certain kind of boundaries. And I did increasingly set boundaries, but my former wife was acting out of the relationship, outside of it. In other words, she left. She was gone. And rather than me clinging to that, and I had reasons to do so, but rather than doing that, I think a more mature Fred would have said, yeah, you're outside of the relationship and I need to let you go. And I think that's what Paul argues in 1 Corinthians 7. So anyway, I just think that there's the Christian church, we struggle with how to understand these relationships. And I think that there are women who just think they've got to suffer through it. And men sometimes too. I was in that situation too, where I was putting up with a lot of wrong and injustice, thinking I was being forgiving and all this kind of stuff. And I was trying to be. But hindsight tells me that I think other courses of action were possible. And I would say even biblical, scriptural. But anyway, so such as life, right? I mean, we learn as we go. But these are really important passages. So that's what we just covered. The husband-wife relationship, the household codes, these core relationships. We're going to be moving to the next kind of core important relationship, which is the parent-child relationship, or really the father-to-children relationship. In Aristotle's, again, political ideology in his Politics, he talks about the core relationships that a man has in his household, one with his wife, his slaves, and his children. And the way that Paul is dealing with these, he's switching the order. He's dealing with wives and husbands first. He's linking it to creation. And then Um, he's also dignifying the 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 submissive, or what was understood to be the more submissive person in the man's relationship. And he's dignifying them by addressing them rather than just saying to the man, make them submit, put them in subjection, treat them this way, and this kind of thing. So Paul's switching the order. He's addressing the subordinated person, or the person that is seen in juxtaposition to the man, and he's dignifying them by talking to them about their role. And again, the theological reordering is profound. So the husband, wife first, um, and also all of these relationships are coming out of the command, be filled with the Spirit. And so the Spirit's interaction in our lives and our relationships is presumed explicitly, actually, made clear. So husband, wife, linking to creation. Here we're going to see parent-child linking to living long on the land, or do we translate gay earth? And then finally the servant master or slave master relationship, which is linked to eschatological judgment. I mean, this is masterful discourse. Creation, living long now, judgment. So this is a highly theologically arranged, thoughtful discourse. It's truly amazing to me. And we already saw a lot of chiasms. I think there probably are some chiasms here. I'll point at least one of them to you now. So let's jump into 6:1. Tatekna, that's a vocative. Tatekna, obey your parents. This verb obey, it's a command form. I'll go into a drawing mode. So we'll cut off that ending. Oh, that's too thick. I'm gonna make that a little bit smaller. So I want that to be smaller. So I'm gonna cut off that ending. That's a little better, not much. This is the direct object. And it's dative case because this verb takes the dative case for its direct object. And you just have to look that up. If you go to a lexicon, it'll say with the dative. And so just because some of you may not believe me on that, no, I'm kidding. I can show you that. So what's kind of interesting is it takes both the genitive and the dative. So that's interesting. So what is the difference? I think there maybe a difference. I haven't studied that to tease that out, but this indeed can take both the dative and the genitive, and both of them are dative or of persons, genitive of person or dative of persons. So anyway, okay, so we're getting going here. Now in the Lord. So obey them in the Lord. Now this in the Lord is highly contested. So here is some text critical data there. It's given a C rating. This comes from the United Bible Society, probably 5th edition. In the Lord is found in these manuscripts. Papyri are listed first, then codices. And these are codices as well. At this point, it switches to, notice that these have letters, and then these have zeros before their numbers. Those are uncials. Uncial are a type of manuscript that are uppercase, and they tend to be older. Then at this point, these don't have zeros in front of them. These are called minuscules. I'm not going to spell that out because it'll take too long. And I'll probably misspell it too. So there's a lot of minuscules. These have varying quality depending, and you have to kind of study which ones. This is a pretty interesting one. This one particularly. even though it's a minuscule, it has an Alexandrian text type. So this one is kind of a significant one, and you just kind of learn that over time, and you can read up about the character of these. You have some lectionaries. You have this is Old Italian, and these are the names of those manuscripts. You've got some Syriac, Coptic. What happened is a lot of data, and I copied this into a message, and I was able to get rid of all the metadata because it pastes in really messy. But what happened is that these are actually supposed to be superscripts. These are Coptic manuscripts, sub-manuscripts. These are manuscripts of Syriac, etc. So this reading has Old Latin, it's got Vulgate, Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, Ethiopic, Georgian, Slavonic, as well as these church father readings. So this is what's nice about this is that you have broad distribution. You've got one of our earliest Pauline papyri, some good support here, and then some early church fathers. But omitting this verse is Vaticanus, which usually Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, these two usually go together. And so to see them separated, also you have D split. Now, D, F, G, these are what are called Western texts. And this is the first corrector, but the original indicated by the asterisks omitted it, but then a corrector came by and added it. And I'd have to look at the date of that corrector. You also have some old Latin manuscripts. So here's some other ones. And so you have, two old Latin manuscripts versus, five. Then you have Marcion according to Tertullian. Now, what is so significant about that is Marcion is old. I mean, we're talking 130 to 50, right? So this is pretty old. According to Tertullian, which, he's dated like 180, I believe. So according to him, Cyril of Jerusalem, Cyprian. Well, in the end, you have kind of an early attestation to this being omitted, but Marcion, he was changing scriptures anyway. So I don't know how significant that is. And what I'm seeing is that basically we have Western support for the omission, the Western tradition of textual manuscripts. The Western tradition isn't usually seen as positively as the Alexandrian, but there is a broader geographical distribution than just the Alexandrian. So I don't know. I'm puzzled why they gave that a C rating, honestly. I think it should be a B rating. So anyway, this is something and not put in brackets. So they put this in bracket to say it's questionable. But I guess there's motivation why a scribe would want to add it. But it also is fitting with the internal style of what Paul has been arguing about. So anyway, I just thought it'd be fun to kind of look at that textual variant. And what this does is, again, provide a framework for the obedience of the children, right? Because what does a child do, or children, and we can talk about, these might be older children, not just like little small children, but like young adults who are still under the household of the father or the parents. But what if they're asking them to do something wrong, like unjust, illegal? Well, the obedience is relativized to in the Lord. And here I'm assuming that in the Lord is modifying, obey them in the context of the Lord. I don't think that in the Lord is modifying your parents in the Lord, like your spiritual parents. That would be a real interesting spin on it. I don't think that's what's being said here. But okay, so as we keep going on, we have a GAR statement, which is strengthening. And basically, it says, this is right. This is right. This is the right thing to do. Dikaios is an adjective, a predicate adjective here. This family of words related to dikaiosune, justification or righteousness. Diakosis might be more justification. Dikaio is the verb I rectify or I justify. I think these words primarily have to do with rightly relating. I think that captures it all. And I need to probably write a book on this just to explain how this works, because rightly relating can mean many different things. It can mean just behavior. It can mean having faith and trusting in what God has done in Jesus. God demonstrates his right relating to his creation who have fallen by rectifying and setting us in a proper pathway so that we can live differently. That's under the purview of what God does for his creation, is to rectify them. And that rectification is his way of rightly relating to us. I mean, after all, he is the God of the universe. And if anyone's able to do this kind of rectification work, it's him. And he presumably has the motivation to do that because he is all love and all holiness and all just and merciful and sovereign and all powerful. So all these things kind of blended together. Surely he would be able to rectify us and set us into a different course and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so I think this rightly relating here is then brought into the context of children in regard to their parents. This is just the natural way of God setting up the world, is through these relationships. And really the parent-child relationship becomes an analogy to, again, like the church Christ church relationship, analogy to God as father and parent to us as his children. That's the fundamental reality. And as God conceived of and instantiated making of the world, envisioning relationships, surely one of the core things that the parent-child relationship is mirrored off of and reflective of is God's relationship to us as his children. And so if you want to read a little bit more about this, look at Hebrews 12 and the analogy that author there makes with having a father on earth and a spiritual father in heaven. And there's some analogies there. Next, Paul says, tema, honor. And then you have a direct object, a double direct object, honor your father and your mother. Okay, so it's not just a one-way kind of thing, right? And at this point, he's quoting part of the Decalogue, right? The 10 Commandments, the 10 instructions, honor. So tema is from the verb temao. Temao is an alpha contract verb, which means that that alpha is going to win out when added to the epsilon, which is the imperative singular, second singular form. That that alpha is going to beat that epsilon, and that's kind of a weird form to see there. That's actually an imperative second singular, present active imperative. So yeah, tema. So both father and mother. How significant of that? And Paul then adds, which is the first commandment with a promise. So that's pretty cool that Paul is kind of recognizing that, expositing that in context. So he's quoting from Scripture. He's understanding it in context, which is the atus there is an indefinite relative pronoun. So this indefinite relative pronoun sets up a subordinate clause. That's why I'm putting it in brackets. Atus is kind of cool. This indefinite relative pronoun uses the indefinite pronoun tis as well as the relative pronoun forms here a, and that a is attracted to the feminine entole, which means commandment. So that's why it's feminine. You have two ways to parse this verb: the tis part, which is masculine or feminine in form, nominative singular, or the a, which is clearly feminine singular nominative. Now, why use the indefinite relative pronoun, and why not just the relative pronoun? I mean, you could have just used a with the rough breathing mark there. Why choose atis? Well, I think atis, as I think it was Maximilian Zerwick in his Greek book, I forget the exact name of it, he was teasing out that there's often a causal or substantiation, that's my term, linkage, that with atis, you're getting kind of a particularization which is marked indefiniteness, which may kind of generalize or diffuse its meaning in a sense. So it can be used in contexts where it's actually providing support by way of its elaboration. And I think that's present here. You could almost substitute for it is the first commandment with a promise. You can almost see how that logically works. So whenever I see an indefinite relative pronoun, I try to see if I can make, if that rule obtains in that case. So yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get this. No, I can't even get it smaller. I wonder why it's drawing so large. Well, anyway, okay. So then we come across an ina, and then here you get a purpose clause in order that it would go well for you. For you, it'd go well. In order to go well for you, and you would be a long liver. That's kind of an interesting word, right? Macrochronios, upon the land. You'd be a long liver on the land. You singular, this is the future of imi. It's a compound goal or a consequence. I think it's more of a goal. And that's okay. It's okay to want to have things go well and to live long. And you're gonna there's a promise, at least in the Torah, that this would happen. And so how does that promise work out in our lives? And is this just kind of an automatic thing? Um, is it a generalized kind of promise that typically, people who tend to, line up and support their godly parents, and embody that godliness, that God is going to bless them in kind of the physical comings and goings of life. I'm not talking blessing materially, but just that you tend to kind of open up pathways of goodness and benefit. I mean, because you do good, and that comes around to you, as you're kind and compassionate and charitable in your relationships, as you're dikeos, righteously relating to people, that this often will come back. Now, I mean, we know that that's not always the case, and there could be circumstances where, in fact, because of our goodness and representing the Lord, we're targeted, we're persecuted. So the Lord promises that as well. But in this kind of idealized sense, in terms of the household and the microcosm of the household, Paul is laying this out as important, as scriptural, um, an ideal, a generalized ideal that has these goals in mind. So I think it's worth us thinking about that and and what that might mean in our context. Pray through that to embody that as much as we can. So he dignifies the children by issuing two commands, present tense, which is suggesting ongoingness. Obey your parents in the Lord, subordinated to that, in the Lord relationship, and honor them so that it might go well with you and you might be a long liver on the earth or on the land. And this word gay is an interesting one. It can mean both. In the context of Exodus, where this is being quoted from, probably land is more in view, although earth could be. Eretz, the word that from which gay is translated, Eretz in Hebrew also can mean both land, specifically like the promised land, or the earth as a whole. So, in fact, somewhere I have notes where I show that these words, both of these words, within a few verses can have both senses, which indicates that it really is highly contextual. And so you have to kind of think about it in context. All right. So, ke o pateres me parorgidzete ta tekna umon, Allah ektrefete av ta en pedia ke nu thesia kuriu. All right, so now Paul's going to turn to address the fathers. Now it's interesting that he's addressing the fathers. He could have addressed the parents. So, why is he just calling out the fathers? Is it that the mothers are entailed here? Sometimes with like al del fu brothers, really sisters are implied in that, and so siblings is probably a good way to translate that. Is it possible that mothers are entailed in this masculine form, this masculine word? I don't know. That's worth thinking about. I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. Because on the one hand, um, it seems like he could have used, obviously, and did up above, the more generic term parents. So, and then on the other hand, just like Paul kind of spends a lot of time admonishing husbands, um, it could be, in other words, he's addressing the male part of this a lot. That maybe he is singling out and specifying the role of fathers. I'm reminded of the ending of Malachi, which is quite significant. Malachi doesn't have that many verses. Let's go to Malachi 4. I guess I'll just have to go to 4:1. Oh, come on. Oh, well, of course it's not going to be there. Malachi is not in the UBS text. So I think it's right around there. Oh, no, verse 6. So this is how Malachi ends. That Elijah is going to come before the great and terrible day of the Lord, and he will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with the curse. Wow. This is really significant. I think this is describing John the Baptist's ministry. In fact, if you go to Luke, when the angel is speaking to Zechariah in the temple, lo and behold, he's going to come in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children. There is Malachi right there. So this is the angel describing the vocation of John the Baptist. And what is this mutual turning of father to children, children to fathers? It's national repentance. This is what national repentance looks like. The engagement of the fathers in particular to care for properly their children. And so I think that John the Baptist is fulfilling the Malachi prophecy. He is the Elijah. And I suspect that the great and coming terrible day of the Lord is the judgment that befell Jerusalem in AD 70, the tragic event. And this was what was at stake. Is the land going to be cursed or not? This is what Jesus foresaw on the horizon, and this is why he wept over Jerusalem as he approached the city, and particularly in Luke's gospel. He wept. So if you go to Luke, it's at 19:20. No, it's a little bit later. And when he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it. All right. So this is a terrible time. So all this to say, though, is that fathers may hold a particular role of education, particularly. Although women did in antiquity as well. But it's intriguing that he's calling out fathers. It reminds me of the end of Malachi, found in Luke 1:16 regarding John the Baptist's ministry. Okay. So don't provoke your children to anger. Par orgidzete. Wow, this is a present tense prohibition. Orgidzete means to be angry. So the par is interesting as a preposition. I think it adds an element of like the anger having a life of its own, like beside. So when a person is beside themselves in anger, I think this par does that with par orgidzo. I think it ups the ante in terms of what that anger looks like. So such that it's like a display of an outward manifestation of it. So to make someone angry, um, yeah, parorgismos, the noun form related to this verb, provoking to anger. So you can see here that there is a state of being intensely provoked. So this is a pretty serious kind of thing happening here. So someone is asking if there's a difference between Greek and Roman household codes. Yeah, certainly the pater familias, they had a stronger role in the family for sure. Yeah, than men did in the oikos. Um, it's interesting though, in the Greek culture, the women and men were separated when it came to dinner parties, whereas in the Roman household they could be together. So there's some interesting gender differences there as well. But yeah, the fathers had a little bit more authoritas. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting question to think about. Whose audience is primarily in mind here, or what cultural setting might be more influencing what Paul is saying here? Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. So don't provoke your children. So how would a father provoke? Well, a father can provoke by being hard on them, being like way too hard. And I think there's stories of that. My dad really pushed me in terms of my grades. Um, and when I got a B in a class that was not acceptable for him in high school, I remember really, um, really got I really got mad, and then he really got mad at me getting mad at him. So I was provoked, because and I probably could have done better, but anyway, it was an escalation, and so parents can provoke by having high expectations. Um, Maybe they can provoke by being neglectful as well. Maybe there's kind of two extremes. So what might it be that would provoke children? They might provoke by being physically abusive. Um, so I think there's different things, and I think this would be worth exploring culturally, because I'm sure Plutarch and other moralists of the day probably talked about parenting and probably the failures of fathers in particular, or the kinds of abuses or something. So I'm guessing that there's kind of there's an iceberg beneath this term. I'm guessing that would be worth exploring, and maybe someone has in some article or essay or book. So don't provoke. So here you have a may Allah construction, which is analogous to an uk Allah, where the law is providing the correction. So this is what is the goal. Um, Provide for them, feed them, care for them, and then you have two different words here um, used as and again subordinated to Christ. So in the paideia, the education and correction of the Lord. So paideia is a broader term, huge concept. Paideia was what Greek culture was trying to instill, and big term, big concept culturally. Here it's used more positively. Uh, and then new thesia is more of a corrective, like disciplinary corrective kind of sense. So you have a positive and then a dissuasive correction kind of piece here. And both really are needed when you're raising children, and both positive goal, positive formation, but then there's also when there's oversteps to provide that kind of correction. So ekatrefete, this is an interesting kind of word because it literally provides nourish, literally means to nourish, provide food, but then it has like an extended sense of to rear up or bring. So in the LSJ lexicon, you can see here bring up from child, here rear up. Um, when it's middle, it's used of animals. That's kind of interesting. Um, so is this about food or raising? Um, and I think it's related to um, Trefo, obviously. So I'm gonna look up Trefo. I think Trefo has to do with um, like rearing, as if like feeding, let grow. I don't know if it's related to like nursing or babies. Um, Trefo. But anyway, so Trefo. Um, so ek Trefo, the ek would be like maybe perfective, to kind of nourish into adulthood in a sense. It's kind of interesting. It's used to congeal, to grow, increase, bring up, rear. Yeah. So I think this is just a generalized term. I'm not sure that it's restricted to feeding. It could be more generally rearing. Where I was thinking of that, if this does indeed have kind of a sense of feeding, here the food is instruction, and there's almost like a merging of like a food domain with a instruction domain. And I think this could be significant because fathers, parents often think of themselves primarily as providers. physical providers and like we put food on the table and that kind of stuff. But Paul is saying it's much more than that. It's not just providing. It's not just food on the table. It is indeed a curriculum of the Lord and an instruction of the Lord. So it's not just food. Um, yeah, so James Sedlicek, I was thinking Ektrefo works a lot like our English turnout. Yeah, maybe where the out is the kind of perfective goal of it to feed out. Maybe, when you raise hogs, you feed them out. You finish them out by feeding them. You get them on the right diet, and they really put on a lot of weight and fat, and it makes it really good to when you slaughter them because they're well fed and marbled. Yeah. All right. So any questions here? I was prepared to go further, but I don't want to rush ahead too much. I think we can finish the next little unit next time. I won't be as elaborative, I think. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about what we've done here? Any grammatical things? All right. Well, I think I'll stop right there and look forward to having you join us next time. If you want to take an exegesis course with me, learn New Testament interpretation, do check out that course. It's going to start in March. We'll meet once a week. Also, we'll have a chance to look if you have a particular New Testament verse or verses that trouble you. We can talk about, maybe getting a framework around how to interpret that. So anyway, it'll be a good opportunity for us, I think, to learn together. Take care, everybody.